Before we set sail into the mists of today's tale, a small reminder. If these stories are a harbor for your soul, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Every comment is a lighthouse for us in the vast ocean of the internet. Now, let us begin. The lighthouse at Needle Point was never meant to be a home. It was a jagged tooth of rock and iron standing defiantly against the Atlantic. For 40 years, it was inhabited by one man, Elias Thorne. Elias wasn't just a lightkeeper, he was a horologist of the impossible. In the heart of the lighthouse, beneath the great rotating lens, sat a clock. But it didn't track hours or minutes. It had 13 faces, each rotating at a speed that defied physics. Some said it tracked the tides, others said it tracked the lives of the sailors who never came home. I arrived at Needle Point when I was 6 years old, tied to a wooden crate. I was the only survivor of the SS Aurora. Elias found me on the rocks, shivering and blue, clutching a brass key that I didn't remember taking. Elias Thorne was a man made of leather and silence. He didn't know what to do with a child. He fed me hardtack and fish soup, and he taught me that the most important thing in the world was the tick. "The world is falling apart, Clara," he would say, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "Gravity fails, empires crumble, and the sea swallows the sun. But the clock keeps the rhythm. As long as it ticks, the world stays in its orbit." He spent his nights in the gear room, oiling the brass teeth of the great mechanism. I spent mine listening to the walls. The lighthouse didn't just stand there, it groaned, it breathed. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, it sang. One night, curiosity overcame my fear. I climbed the spiral stairs to the clock room. The air was warm and smelled of hot oil. Elias was asleep in his chair, a magnifying glass still clutched in his hand. I looked at the 13 faces of the clock. One showed the moon's phases, another showed the constellations. But the 13th face, it was blank, no numbers, no hands, just a smooth surface of polished silver. I held my brass key near it. The silver surface began to ripple like water. Suddenly, a reflection appeared. It wasn't my face. It was a woman with hair like seafoam, standing in a garden of coral. She was screaming, but no sound came out. I dropped the key. The silver turned back to metal. "You shouldn't have seen that, Clara," Elias whispered from the shadows. Elias sat me down and told me the truth about the Aurora. It wasn't just a shipwreck, it was an experiment. My mother had been a scientist, an architect of time. She believed that time wasn't a river, but a machine, and that machines could be repaired. She built the 13 faces, Elias said, his eyes wet with tears. She wanted to build a way to bring people back, to reverse the second the ship hit the reef. But the sea is jealous, Clara. It doesn't like to give back what it has taken. He showed me his arm. It wasn't flesh and bone. From the elbow down, it was a complex lattice of gears and copper wires. "I am the prototype," he said, "and I am running out of time." As the years went by, the heavy quiet of the lighthouse was replaced by the frantic ticking. The clock was speeding up. Elias was growing weaker, his mechanical arms sparking and seizing in the salt air. A storm was coming, not just a weather event, but a time storm, a tear in the fabric of the world that my mother's experiment had started decades ago. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the waves began to flow backward. "The 13th face is the anchor, Clara," Elias gasped, clutching his chest. "If it stops ticking during the storm, the Aurora will be lost forever in the fold of time, and so will we." After the night, I saw the woman in the silver face of the clock. The silence between Elias and me changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of conspirators. He led me to a hidden compartment beneath the lens of the lighthouse. where thousands of translucent blueprints were stored. They weren't drawn on paper, but etched into thin sheets of mica. Your mother, Sarah, didn't just want to tell time, Clara. Elias said, his mechanical fingers clicking as he traced a diagram of a spiral. She wanted to heal it. She saw time as a wounded animal bleeding out into the ocean. She believed that shipwrecks, deaths, and lost loves were just glitches in the gears of the universe. I looked at the mica sheets. They described the lighthouse not as a beacon for ships, but as a giant needle. It was designed to stitch the fabric of time back together at its weakest point, the wreath of sorrows. Elias's voice grew hollow as he recounted the final voyage of the SS Aurora. My mother had been on board with a portable version of the 13 Faces. She believed that if she could synchronize the ship's clock with the lighthouse clock, she could create a safety net. If the ship hit a rock, she could simply turn the hand back 5 minutes, and the tragedy would never have happened. But time is not a machine that likes to be tampered with, Elias whispered. The ocean rose up to protect its secrets. When the Aurora hit the reef, your mother didn't try to save herself. She crawled to the ship's clock and used her own life force to power the final tick that threw you toward the shore. She traded her eternity for your tomorrow. I touched the brass key in my pocket. It felt warm, pulsating with a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. I wasn't just a survivor, I was a living piece of a broken clock. Elias began my formal training. Each of the 13 faces required a different type of maintenance. The face of tides had to be cleaned with salt from the deepest part of the bay. The face of constellations had to be aligned with the stars using a telescope made of obsidian. The face of regrets, the most dangerous one, required a drop of human oil tear once a month to keep the gears from seizing. Why the 13th face, Elias? Why is it blank? I asked one evening as the wind howled like a pack of wolves outside. Because the 13th face is the possible, he replied. It is the only part of the clock that isn't finished. It is waiting for a hand to draw the future. Your mother died before she could finish it, and I am too much of the past to touch it. As the months turned into years, Elias's mechanical parts began to fail. The copper turned green with verdigris, and the clicking in his chest grew louder and more erratic. He was no longer eating regular food. He drank a strange amber oil that smelled of ozone. One night, his mechanical arm seized completely, locking into a claw like grip. The storm is coming, Clara, he gasped, leaning against the cold iron wall. I can feel the aurora calling from the bottom of the reef. The fold in time is opening. The sea is coming to collect the debt your mother owed. I looked out at the horizon. The water wasn't blue or green anymore. It was a shimmering, oily black, and the stars above seemed to be dripping like wax. The rhythm of the tick had become a frantic, panicked heartbeat. The time storm didn't start with thunder, it started with the smell of 1,000 years ago, love, ancient forests, and extinct flowers. Then the shadows began to behave strangely. My shadow grew long and turned into a tree. Elias's shadow became a young man again, standing straight and tall. Clara, take the key. Elias shouted over a wind that sounded like 1,000 voices screaming at once. Go to the 13th face. You have to draw the line. If you don't, the reef of sorrows will expand until it swallows every now and then that ever existed. I climbed the stairs, the iron steps groaning under my feet. The lighthouse was vibrating, the great lens above spinning so fast it turned into a halo of pure white light. I reached the clock room, and there it was, the silver, blank face, rippling like a mirror in a fever dream. The storm did not bring water, it brought memory. As the wind shrieked around the iron gallery of the lighthouse, the rain hitting the glass wasn't liquid. It was crystalline, shattering upon impact into tiny sparks of light. Each droplet contained a second of history: a soldier's last breath in 1812, a child's laughter from a summer that hadn't happened yet, the sound of my mother's voice calling my name from the deck of the Aurora. I stood before the 13th face, the silver surface now boiling like mercury. Clara. Elias's voice drifted up the spiral stairs, but it sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. Don't look at the reflections. They are traps. The sea wants you to step inside so it can close the circle. But how could I not look? In the silver ripples, I saw my mother. She was standing in the engine room of the sinking ship, her hands glowing with the same amber light that powered Elias. She looked up directly through the layers of time, and her eyes met mine. "Fix it, Clara," she whispered. The sound didn't come from her mouth. It vibrated through the brass key in my hand. "The gears are jammed with grief. Release them." Below me, the great mechanism began to scream. The sound of metal grinding against metal was unbearable. I looked down the central shaft and saw Elias. He had stripped off his coat, exposing the horrifying truth of his existence. He wasn't just a man with a mechanical arm. His entire rib cage had been replaced by brass plates and oscillating springs. He had thrown himself into the primary drive wheel, using his own body as a wedge to keep the clock from spinning out of control. The friction, he choked out, smoke rising from his copper joints. "It's too much. The weight of 40 years is trying to stop the tick." I realized then that the clock wasn't just tracking time, it was resisting it. The ocean wanted the great stillness, a world where nothing changed, nothing died, and nothing grew. The lighthouse was the only thing keeping the pulse of life beating against the void. The 13th face suddenly split into two distinct images. On the left, I saw the Aurora righting itself. The reef vanished, the hole in the hole sealed, and my mother stepped off the ship onto the harbor of the city. She lived, but in that version of reality, the lighthouse was dark. Elias was a pile of rusted scrap, and the world outside the harbor was a gray, stagnant mist where no one ever aged and no one ever dreamed. On the right, I saw the now. I saw the storm, the pain in Elias's eyes, and the lonely life of a girl on a rock. But I also saw the stars. I saw the way the tide actually moved, bringing new life even as it took the old away. Choice is the only thing the sea cannot predict. Elias yelled, his voice cracking as a gear snapped in his chest. "Use the key, Clara. Write the possible." I took the brass key. It was vibrating so violently, it felt like it was trying to shatter my bones. I pressed the tip of the key against the rippling silver surface of the 13th face. It felt like carving into cold honey. I didn't write words. I didn't know how to describe the future in a language of letters. Instead, I drew the only thing I knew to be true: a circle. But I didn't close it. I left a tiny gap at the top, a space for the unexpected, for the next. The moment the key touched the metal, the silver turned into liquid light. It poured out of the clock face, flowing over my hands, up my arms, and into my chest. I felt every second of my life: the cold water of the shipwreck, the taste of Elias's fish soup, the smell of hot oil, all of it compressing into a single blinding point of existence. The lighthouse gave one final, bone shaking shudder. The great lens above let out a beam of light so intense it pierced the time storm and touched the very bottom of the reef of sorrows. I heard a click. It wasn't the frantic, panicked click of the last few years. It was a deep, resonant, and certain sound. Tick. The wind stopped instantly. The rain of memories evaporated. The bruised purple sky faded into a soft pre-dawn gray. I ran down the stairs to the basement. The primary drive wheel was still. Elias was slumped against the central pillar. His mechanical arm was silent. The gears inside twisted and melted. His eyes were open, looking at the ceiling. Is it moving? He whispered. I listened. From deep within the stone walls, from the very heart of the island, came the sound. Tick tock, tick tock. It was slow. It was steady. It was the sound of a world that had permission to continue. Yes, Elias, I said, kneeling beside him. It's moving just like it's supposed to. He smiled, a genuine human smile that smoothed the wrinkles of 40 years of fear. Then my shift is finally over. After Elias passed, I buried him in the only soil the island offered, a small patch of earth behind a lighthouse, sheltered from the salt spray. I didn't mark his grave with a cross. I marked it with a rusted gear from the great mechanism. The first year of being alone was the loudest year of my life. Without Elias's voice, the house became a symphony of iron and wind. I learned that silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of things we usually ignore. I heard the way the lighthouse expanded in the midday sun, a series of metallic groans like a giant stretching his limbs. I heard the way the moss grew on the north side, a microscopic rustle of green life. I became the guardian of the interval. My life was dictated by the tick. I woke with it, I ate with it, and I slept with it. I learned that if I leaned my head against the cold stone walls, I could feel the pulse of the earth itself, regulated by the 13th face. By the fifth year, I stopped feeling like a girl and started feeling like a part of the rock. My skin was tanned by the sun and toughened by the saw. I no longer needed the mica blueprints to understand the clock. I could hear when a gear was dry or when a spring was losing its tension, just by the way the light flickered in the lens above. I began to see the ocean differently. It wasn't just a body of water, it was a library of lost things. Occasionally, the face of regrets would glow and a message would wash up on the shore, not in a bottle, but written in the patterns of the driftwood or the arrangement of shells. Once, I found a piece of wreckage from a ship that had disappeared 2 centuries ago. It was a child's toy, a wooden horse, still perfectly painted. I placed it on the mantelpiece. The lighthouse wasn't just keeping time, it was collecting the stories that time tried to throw away. In the 10th year, the horizon broke. It was a Tuesday, a day when the face of tides was perfectly still. I saw a small white speck on the edge of the world. It didn't move like a fishing boat or a merchant ship. It moved with a strange, deliberate grace. As the boat drew closer, I realized it was a simple rowboat, but the man inside wasn't rowing. He was sitting perfectly still, and the water seemed to be carrying him toward Needle Point as if it were a conveyor belt. He was young, perhaps 20, with eyes that looked like they had seen too much of the sun. He stepped onto the jagged rocks and looked up at the lighthouse. He didn't look afraid. He looked like someone who had finally reached home after a very long walk. "You're late," I said, standing on the gallery. "I came as fast as the rhythm allowed," he replied. His voice was melodic, lacking the gravelly edge of Elias's tone. The clock, it called to me in my dreams. It told me the keeper was tired. His name was Julian. He wasn't a scientist and he wasn't a sailor. He was a musician who had lost his hearing in a fever, only to find that he could feel the vibrations of the world instead. "I can hear the gears in the air, Clara," he told me as we sat in the gear room. "I can hear the gap you left in the 13th face. It's a beautiful sound. It sounds like hope." I began to teach him, just as Elias had taught me. But Julian didn't use oil and wrenches. He used a tuning fork. He would strike the fork against the brass vases and listen to the resonance. If the note was flat, he knew the time was dragging. If it was sharp, the future was rushing in too fast. Under Julian's touch, the lighthouse began to glow with a different light, a softer, warmer amber. The heavy quiet was gone. replaced by a living harmony. One evening, as the sun dipped below the waves, Julian asked me the question I had been avoiding for years. Clara, if the 13th face is the possible, why do we stay here? If time is healed, why must it be guarded? I looked at my hands, now scarred and old, and then at the great rotating lens above. Because the world is always trying to stop Julian. People want to stay in their happiest moments forever, or they want to hide in their darkest grief so they don't have to face tomorrow. The lighthouse doesn't just tell time, it forces time to move. It is the push that keeps the heart of the world beating. I realized then that my mother hadn't built a machine to bring people back. She had built a machine to make sure people could move forward. The Aurora didn't sink so I could mourn her. It sank so I could become the one who ensures that no other ship ever has to be lost in the great stillness. Leaving Needle Point felt like tearing a bandage off a wound that had been healing for 30 years. I stood on the mainland pier, my boots feeling unnaturally heavy on the solid, unmoving earth. For the first time in my memory, the world didn't tilt. There was no rhythm of the waves, no groan of the iron tower. The mainland was a cacophony of unsynchronized lives, thousands of people, all moving to their own frantic, broken tempos. Everything is out of tune. I whispered to Julian as he saw me off. That's why you're going, Clara, he said, holding the brass key one last time before handing it back to remind them that there is a beat to the song. I traveled to the city of Oakhaven, the place my mother had called home. I carried her mica blueprints in a leather satchel, feeling like a spy from a forgotten century. I wasn't looking for a house, I was looking for the source of the static. A strange, hollow feeling in the air that suggested the rhythm of the world was being muffled. I found the laboratory, but it wasn't a ruin. It was a cathedral of glass and steel. It was the headquarters of the Kronos Collective. They weren't scientists, they were architects of stagnation. I met their leader, a man named Marcus, who looked like he had been 40 years old for a century. His skin was too smooth, his eyes too bright, and his movements too calculated. We've been waiting for the keeper of Needle Point, Marcus said, his voice as cold as a mountain stream. Your mother was a visionary, Clara, but she was weak. She wanted to heal time. We want to own it. He showed me their project, a massive dampening field designed to counteract the pulse of the lighthouse. They wanted to create a gilded age, a world where no one aged, no one died, and no one ever had to suffer the consequences of time. Imagine, Marcus whispered, a sunset that never ends, a love that never fades into old age, perfection, frozen in amber. As I walked through their perfect zone, I saw the horror of it. I saw children who had been 10 years old for decades, their eyes vacant and devoid of the spark of growth. I saw painters staring at the same canvas for 20 years, unable to make a final stroke because finality no longer existed. The world wasn't happy, it was paralyzed. Without the threat of the next, the now had become meaningless. Grief was gone, but so was joy, for joy requires the contrast of sorrow. You're killing them, I said, my hand clenching the brass key in my pocket. We are saving them from the grave, Marcus retorted. And tonight, when the moon reaches its zenith, we will broadcast the stillness globally. The lighthouse clock will be nothing more than a toy in a storm. I knew I couldn't fight them with force. I was one woman against an empire of glass, but I had something they didn't understand. The 13th face. I remembered the gap I had left in the circle, the space for the possible. I found the central transmitter, a giant tuning fork of obsidian and gold. As the collective began their broadcast, a low hum filled the city, a sound that made people stop in their tracks, their hearts slowing to a dangerous crawl. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. I didn't try to break the machine. I did what Julian taught me. I struck the key against the obsidian fork. Ping, The sound was tiny, but it was pure. It carried the resonance of the lighthouse, the salt of the Atlantic, and the sacrifice of Elias Thorne. I channeled every second of my lonely life on the rock into that note. I sang the song of the interval, the melody of moving forward. The resonance shattered the glass walls. The obsidian fork didn't break. It began to vibrate in sympathy with the lighthouse. The static was pierced by the tick. Across the city, people suddenly exhaled. The children in the park looked at their hands and realized they were hungry. The painters finally dropped their brushes, exhausted and satisfied. The sun finally moved past the horizon, and for the first time in years, the stars came out over Oak Haven. Marcus looked at me, his face finally showing the lines of age he had fought so hard to hide. He looked terrified, and then, slowly, he looked relieved. "It hurts," he whispered, clutching his chest as his heart rediscovered its rhythm. "That's how you know you're alive." I didn't stay to be a hero. I went back to the only place where I could breathe. When my boat reached the rocks of Needle Point, Julian was there to catch the rope. He didn't ask what happened. He just listened to the air. "The world sounds messy," he smiled. "It's a beautiful mess," I said. I climbed the spiral stairs to the clock room one last time. I looked at the 13th face. It was no longer blank. It was covered in millions of tiny glowing lines, the paths of every life I had allowed to continue. I am old now. My hands are thin and my breath comes in short, rhythmic bursts. Julian has taken over the heavy lifting, but I still spend my nights in the lens room watching the light sweep across the dark water. Yesterday, a storm brought a gift to the shore, a small wooden crate tied with a blue ribbon. Inside was nothing but a mirror and a note in a language I couldn't read. I don't need to read it. I know what it means. The sea is ready to tell a new story. I sat on the gallery and watched the sunrise. I felt the pulse of the great mechanism beneath my feet. I am the keeper of the clock, but I am also the clock itself. We are all gears in a machine too big to see and too beautiful to understand. The light rotates, the gears turn, the world moves. Tick tock, tick tock. And for now, that is more than enough. Thank you for joining us for this 3-hour odyssey through time, salt, and the iron heart of Needlepoint. If you felt the rhythm of this story, please subscribe and comment with the word timeless to let us know you reached the horizon with us. These stories are a labor of love, and your support keeps our light burning. Until the next tide turns, keep your own clock ticking.